Hey folks, welcome. So this is just a short video lecture on respecting cultural differences, diversity, and that kind of thing. So I'm going to jump right into it, make this as to the point as I can. So just to talk about the key concepts I'm going to kind of cover here, just talk about the importance of diversity today, say a little bit about history of diversity and so forth. But kind of the main things I want to communicate to you are stereotyping. I'm sure you know what a stereotype is. Ethnocentrism, maybe you don't know what that is, big word. And then finally, these two ideas are going to lead us to this bigger idea, which is the unintentional disrespect or discrimination, and how, the biggest problem, at least in my opinion, with diversity is that most discrimination is in fact not intentional. So let's jump in here. So first of all, diversity. The world is becoming more and more diverse as time goes along. And this is why we talk about it, in college seminar, because you might notice college campuses, very diverse places. I think personally, it's one of the things I really like about working in higher education. I personally enjoy being in a diverse environment. You could call it, use the fancy word, a cosmopolitan environment. You have different people, different parts of the world, different backgrounds, different beliefs, different appearances, all in the same place. And we're coming together as human beings to learn, to learn together. I think it's pretty cool. It's also obviously going to be true in most professions too, right? And nowhere is this more true probably than in medicine, and you're all going into healthcare, and so you're obviously going to encounter people from a variety of backgrounds. So it's important to be aware of some of these kind of basic parameters of what you need to think about when you're encountering people who might come from a different background from you. And so when we talk about diversity, there's a number of different types of diversity you could refer to. The first one we usually think of is ethnicity, appearance. I mean, there's a lot out there now about body types and how it's really important that we appreciate the different people have different body types. Not everybody's going to look like the supermodel in the advertisement, and we need to appreciate that kind of diversity. Religion, obviously, is a big one. Economic class. Disability is a big one these days. They talk about ableism and the way you should approach people who might have a disability, and the way you refer to people who might have a disability, and the way you shouldn't assume that everyone, is able in the same way. Sexual orientation, I'm sure, you've heard about. That's another one that's been a pretty big one. Age is another one. Gender identity, gender identity, gender binarism, the idea that not everyone is born with a gender identity that they ultimately accept. And so that's another form of diversity. So diversity is all over us, all over the place. The list could probably keep going on in terms of, ways people are different that we should be aware of to make sure that, we're respecting people who might be different from us. And so just some basic tips on just simple things you can do to make sure you're respecting, diversity. And it's not really about respecting diversity. It's about respecting the human beings you come across, right? And I'm sure you all want to respect the human beings you come across. And I think this is probably something we can all agree on, right? So that's really what this is about. There's a lot out there right now. Some people are not so happy about some of this diversity training. The federal government made some recommendations about this. You might have seen it in the news. Some people don't really like this because they feel like they're under attack. For me, it has nothing to do with attacking anyone. It has to do with the facts, two facts. Number one, I personally believe that almost everybody, truly does want to respect other human beings. That's part one. And part two is we live in an incredibly diverse world, and just doing that can be more difficult than it sounds like. respecting other people can be more difficult than it sounds like, because we encounter all these people who come from different backgrounds. And if we're not very conscious of the way we're doing it, we can unintentionally be disrespectful. We can unintentionally discriminate. So anyway, some simple tips. Number one, pronounce people's names correctly. And if someone has a name that seems hard to pronounce, ask them how they pronounce it, and respect them in that way. That's an important thing, I think. Preferred terms. Call people by what they like to be called. People from different ethnic groups, like to be called certain things. And sometimes these things change over time, For example, with Native Americans, we called them Indians because Christopher Columbus thought he was in India, but he wasn't. And then we went through a whole thing where they're Native Americans, they're Indigenous Americans. But now actually a lot of Native Americans prefer to be called American Indians. So it's kind of interesting. We've kind of come full circle. But these things kind of change. But do a little research and find out what people prefer to be called. And so when you're talking about people who have disabilities, one thing people say is using what's called the person first language. And so you could say things like, instead of saying a disabled person, you could say a person with disabilities or a person with different abilities. That way you're putting an emphasis on the fact that they are a person first and that they're a person who has a disability. You're not kind of labeling that person as a disability. And so that can be a small distinction, but it can be a very important one just in terms of showing respect for that human being who's sitting across from you. And another big one I'm sure you've heard about, preferred gender pronouns. And so with all that's going on right now with gender fluidity and gender identity, often you'll see the people are asked to share which pronouns they prefer. Or do you prefer the he, the him? Do you prefer she, her? Do you prefer they? Okay, and so it's nice to be aware of what people prefer in that sense. And finally, advocating for respect. And so I think it's important to speak up if you notice that someone is consciously or unconsciously, intentionally or unintentionally disrespecting someone. Because again, I don't think it's almost never the case that people are intentionally being disrespectful. It does happen, but it's the type of thing where if you can step in, you can maybe diffuse a situation, by encouraging people to just respect each other. And so there's some big hurdles when it comes to respecting diversity, and the first one is stereotypes. And so the reason why stereotypes are so difficult, I'm sure you've heard what a stereotype is. It's when you make a generalization about a whole group of people, and then you apply it to every single person who appears to be a part of that group, And so you have big groups of people, like all women, for example. Like not all women are the same, So if you stereotype about all women, then you're really being disrespectful to like most every woman, because kind of most every woman is not going to really fit that generalization, that stereotype of what women are supposed to be, or what have you. And so the problem with stereotypes is you're kind of denying the individual the ability to be a unique person, and you kind of pigeonhole their identity for them. You're kind of telling them who they are. Nobody likes to be told, who they are. As human beings, we have like consciousness, we have emotions, we have free will, and this kind of thing. And so it's not fair to tell someone what they are. We all, at least to some extent, have the freedom and the rights to choose who we are. And so when you stereotype someone, you're kind of taking away that right, of everyone, that everyone should have to kind of define themselves and be who they are. And in this way, even positive stereotypes can be harmful. And so, to use my own background as an example, so I'm Irish, and there are a lot of bad stereotypes about Irish when it comes to certain things. Well, you could say, "Oh, you're Irish. You must be a great writer. The Irish are such great writers." Well, it might sound like a compliment, but really you're still stereotyping. You're still generalizing about a whole group. It's obviously not true that all Irish people are great writers. And actually, I'm kind of offended because I feel like I've worked very hard to be a pretty good writer. And now you're saying it must just be, some attribute I have because, of my ethnic background. So even positive stereotypes can actually be harmful. And the last bullet point there says race and gender are socially constructed concepts. So what does that mean? It means that as a society, we kind of create these ideas in our head, these stereotypes that, this race is this way, this gender is this way. But those are things that are invented by people. And that's why they're not accurate. And that's why it's not fair to apply them to all people from a given group. So anyway, the big takeaway is when you're dealing with people, it's incredibly important to respect the individuality of each person and to respect each person's ability to define who they are. And stereotyping, is when people take away that right from others, essentially, and you tell other people who they are. And so the reason why stereotyping is such a big problem, even though it's a pretty simple concept, I'm sure you understand, is because the way like a language works, we kind of have to stereotype in order to make sense of the world. Like for every object we encounter, we have to put it into a category, into a kind of put it into a box. So I see, I see this thing here. It's a coffee mug, and I say, well, that's a coffee mug. I'm going to call it a coffee mug, and that's it. And when you're talking about inanimate objects, that's totally fine. The coffee cup is a coffee cup. It doesn't have feelings. It doesn't have consciousness. It doesn't have free will. Its feelings aren't hurt. Its rights have not been infringed upon if I call it a coffee cup. Now, if I see a person walking down the street and this person has certain physical features, and I say, aha, that's a woman. And so therefore, because she's a woman, she must love, going shopping, and, she must have a big collection of purses, and she must hate sports, and she must love cooking, and so it's a very different thing because now we're talking about a human being, and based on what she looks like, I'm making all these assumptions about who she is, and so I'm taking away her right to define herself. So when we're dealing with objects that are not animate, we define those objects, and we have to define the objects to make sense of the world. When we're dealing with people, it's incredibly important that we're aware that we can't play that game with people. You've got to give people the opportunity to define who they are. And so, although stereotyping is a pretty simple concept, it's so hard to not do it because it's a part of the way our minds work, And so we've always got to remember, am I stereotyping this person based on how they look? Because we all kind of do it unintentionally. Okay, so that's stereotyping, ethnocentrism. And so ethnocentrism is the idea that one culture does things right and every other culture is kind of wrong, And usually when you're talking about which culture is right, you're talking about the culture that you belong to, And what's interesting about this is that for a very, very long time in human history, like ethnocentrism was just kind of the way things worked because different cultures, spatially were in very different places. We didn't have transportation technology and all this stuff. So, you would have two cultures and they'd be separated by thousands of miles and they would hardly ever interact. So people in one culture would say, my culture is right. Pretty simple, right? When we live in this culture, we do things the way we do it. If you're not doing it our way, then you're wrong. Easy peasy. However, today, given the world we live in, different cultures live right next to each other, side by side, all over the place. And so it poses a question for us. Which culture is right and which culture is wrong. And the thing is, we've really got to keep in mind that it's not fair to say that one culture is right and another culture is wrong. To be fair, we have to appreciate the different cultures are different. They do things in different ways, and that one culture isn't necessarily correct while another culture is wrong. And now then the next thing is you can start to get into arguments about what is right and wrong. But then you're getting into issues about right and wrong. You're not really talking about which culture is right. So the second bullet point there says social constructionism, culture is invented by people, is not given by nature or God. Therefore, different cultures are constructed differently without kind of one right way of doing things. And so again, in the past, people really believed like we got our culture handed down from God, and so therefore it is correct. And so therefore people who have a different culture are wrong, and so we need to go correct them. And so that's going to lead to all kinds of difficulties today in like a professional workplace. If you go around trying to correct people who come from a different culture, it's going to hurt people's feelings. It's going to create conflict and all this kind of thing. So we just can't do this anymore. But again, the reason why I want to talk about it is because it's a very difficult thing to stop doing, because human beings have literally been doing ethnocentrism for thousands of years. It was just a normal way people did things. In the same way that stereotyping is the normal way we make sense of the world. And so this is why it becomes a difficult issue, because it becomes a problem that we're ethnocentric and we stereotype when we don't even mean to, because these are such natural parts of the way we make sense of the world. And so with ethnocentrism, even if we disagree with another culture's practices, it's important to be tolerant. And so you might not agree with a different, culture's practices, but it's important to kind of accept it for what it is, and avoid the conflict. And again, we always have arguments and debates about what is right and wrong and all this kind of thing. That's kind of a different issue. In your day-to-day practice, there's really no need to bring up all that stuff. That belongs in a different forum of debate. The debate over kind of what is right and what is wrong. Not too long ago, I read an article about the Indian Hindu caste system. And so there are, Hindus today who are conservative and they believe in the caste system. And the question arises, should we acknowledge and allow, Hindus to practice the caste system if they're living within, a Western-style democracy where we believe in diversity and equality and this kind of thing? Because essentially a caste society is you have you're born into a certain class and you're meant to stay there, and there's a hierarchy, and that kind of goes against our beliefs as Westerners. And so it becomes a very difficult question whether those two things are compatible. But anyway, the easy thing for you in college or in a workplace is you want to respect what other people do. If you don't agree with it, you tolerate it, to make sure you're showing respect for others. And finally, a microaggression. And so this is a term that can, some people don't like it because they feel like they're under attack. But really, I would just say a microaggression is when someone does something that is in some way discriminatory or disrespectful, but they don't really mean to. And so this is the end result of what happens if you're not aware of your own stereotyping, if you're not aware of your own ethnocentrism. Then you're going to do small things that maybe are disrespectful to someone who's different from you. And for them, it might not be a big deal. It's not going to be a big deal for you, but for them, it's going to be a really big deal because they're going to feel marginalized. They're going to feel disrespected, and all this kind of thing. And so these are very different from kind of attacks on people because they're not intentional, and it's just a small thing. And this happens because stereotypes and ethnocentrism, there are things that we kind of do that we're usually not aware of doing them. And kind of the whole point of this lecture is to kind of raise your awareness about stereotyping and about ethnocentrism, because I think we all need to kind of be aware of how we perceive other people all the time. Because again, these are ethnocentrism, stereotyping. They're a very intuitive part of the way our minds work. In order to stop stereotyping, in order to stop acting like our culture is the only correct culture, we've really got to stop and reflect and be aware. And then the end result, if you're not aware, is you might do little things that are no big deal to you, but that are really very hurtful to other people. And so, again, what I want to emphasize is that I don't mean this lecture to be something that's accusing anyone of doing anything wrong. What I want to emphasize is that we often need to raise our awareness about our sensitivity towards diversity. And that's only because I truly believe that almost all people really, at the end of the day, they want to respect other human beings, But because we live in this diverse environment, it poses a lot of challenges just to the simple fact of respecting other human beings, So think about it when you encounter people, when you encounter cultures that are different from yours. Just ask yourself, how am I thinking about this person? Is it fair for me to think about them that way? Am I putting them in a box? Am I making assumptions about the type of person they are? When I encounter a different culture, am I assuming that my culture is correct and theirs is wrong? Or am I respecting the fact that we do things differently? And even though I might prefer my culture's way, am I doing enough to respect the fact that they have a right to do things their way as well? So yeah, those are the key concepts there. I'm going to wrap this up. It's gone on longer than I want. But my key point is, we all want to respect people, and respecting people can take a little bit more work than just having good intentions. We need to be a little bit reflective. We need to be a little bit more, we can all always be a little bit more aware of how we deal with the diverse environments we encounter, because, these diverse environments, they really do present a lot of challenges that run counter to a lot of intuitive ways in which we engage with the world. So it's not a simple problem, and it's not simply a matter that some people are bad because whatever. It's a difficult problem, and everybody in the world in a certain way today is going to encounter this problem. And so raise the awareness, respect people. Those are the key takeaways. I'll stop it there. Thank you for watching.